Something that has always bothered me as an English learner myself is when I run into a movie or a video in English where there's people speaking with a British accent and I don't understand a thing.
That's what it's about, you know what I mean? It's like everyone's a bit square at the moment, aren't they? You know what I mean? Everyone's just a bit serious and miserable, you know what I mean?
Should it really be that difficult to comprehend British speech if I can perfectly understand Americans? It's all English, right? Well, the answer is no, it shouldn't be that difficult. It can actually be pretty easy if you know the differences between the two accents. So this is what Ethan and I are exploring in today's lesson, and by the end of it, you'll have learned the 5 aspects of British speech that once you pay attention to them, you'll start to understand your favorite movies, shows, and everything in British English. And what's best is you're gonna have a lot of fun because we analyzed the speech of some of our favorite Brits like Emma Watson, Dua Lipa, Cillian Murphy, Adele, and so on. So, are you ready? That was just me trying to do a British accent, but are you ready? Let's jump into it. Ah, yeah. So, Ethan, something that I hear from almost all the students that I've had, my English students, is that they can understand American English, you know, in media, like TV series, movies. It's easy to understand American English, but it is really difficult to understand British English. Mm-hmm. Why is that?
Oh man, that's a whole can of worms. That's a lot of different things that go into that topic. I would say, even for myself, depending on where that person is from the UK, and the accent that they have, I might not understand them. I might feel more comfortable watching some British programs, some British series or movies with subtitles, because oftentimes there can be a character, maybe just one character even in a show, even though you understand everyone else, who has a more peculiar or an accent that you are not so accustomed to hearing. And then you might miss a lot of what they're saying. So even as a native speaker, sometimes it can be tricky.
Mm-hmm. There's so many accents, like received pronunciation, the Queen's accent, Cockney. But you said an interesting expression there, to open a can of worms. What is that?
If you open a can of worms, it's like something extremely problematic. So it's because the question that you asked, there's so many different factors that go into that it's difficult to just give one reason, you know, that you can understand Americans better than Brits. But actually, something else that might be really important too is just experience. If you understand American English pretty well, it's probably because you've had a lot of exposure, a lot of input with American media, or maybe you're living in the States, or you have American friends, or whatever the case is, and you can't understand British because you haven't done that same work of having a lot of input. And again, this happens even with native speakers, because in general, people from the UK understand Americans much better than Americans understand people from the UK, and this is because they have a lot of influence of our media. So they grow up hearing a lot of American English, whereas in the States, because we have already such strong media, we tend to have very little exposure to British English. And even when we do, movies like Harry Potter and James Bond, they use sort of a watered down version of British English. So we're not accustomed so much to the real thing. Even if we go there and we start speaking with British people, we could sometimes miss things and feel a bit lost.
I still thought it would be interesting to test our ability to understand a true Brit, British speaker in this podcast. I have a clip here that I thought we could watch. And check that out.
Let's give it a look.
Now, before we get into it, let me just say this to our listeners and viewers, that every single week we make lessons just like this one with the best real life examples and stories to help you understand 100% of what natives say and to guide you to speak English naturally in any situation. So we want to tell you exactly how thousands of our students have achieved this advanced level and how I did it too. So if this is something that you want as well, I highly recommend you subscribe to this channel and hit the bell down below so you don't miss any of our new lessons.
Oh, yeah.
Can I ask the Honourable Gentleman what work is being done to make sure that this place is more accessible, particularly for some of our colleagues who have a disability?
Here, here.
I'm sorry, it must be something to do with my Antipodean background. Could you please repeat the question, because I didn't follow it?
I'm saying that a number of parliamentary colleagues who have disabilities do find it quite difficult getting around certain parts of the state. Given that we're doing this refurbishment work, what can be done to make sure that those with a disability are able to move around more freely and the place is accessible?
I'm really sorry. Please, could he do it very slowly in an Antipodean English?
I mean, there were parts of it that I couldn't understand it, but in general, like, I think there were some keywords there that I just totally missed. How about you?
Yeah, I caught words, but the first time he did it, I didn't know what the question was. And then the second time, I was like, oh, okay. I think he was asking. So like the first time I just understood honorable gentlemen, and then I heard accessible, I heard colleagues. So I didn't get enough context there. And then the second time I heard him asking something about people with disabilities and making it accessible in the sense of, I imagine, I don't know exactly too what they were talking about, but I imagine it has something to do with construction or something like this, and making a space accessible for people who are maybe in a wheelchair or have another disability that makes it more difficult for them to go up or down stairs, for example.
Something like that. Yeah.
Yeah. But that's a really tough accent. I think he had a very strong Scottish accent, maybe?
Yeah, so in British English, you have this sea of complexity with all these different accents, but I've noticed that there is some patterns, some common elements in that you're going to find in most accents. So in today's podcast, we're going to explore these 5 key aspects of British English speech, and that is the dropped R sound, the intonation, the very specific musicality that British English has, vowel sounds, the true T sound, and the glottal T sound. So these 5 elements of British speech. So I have a first clip here for us to watch, and this is with actress Emma Watson. Let's check it out.
Edward, my first cocktail that I have to make is an espresso martini, and I feel like of all of the human beings in the world, you might know this piece of information.
Okay, so this is from a video where Emma is making all these different cocktails. And from the very get-go, like from the very beginning, you see the way she says Edward. How did she say that? Did you notice?
Edward.
Edward.
So I think of the 2 things you mentioned, the things I've noticed the most are the R, that I would say Edward, right? With a strong, what we call erotic or rhotic R, I think is actually how it's pronounced, a rhotic R. And Brits tend to have, like you pointed out earlier, this isn't always the case, but normally have a non-rhotic R, meaning that it's very soft or it's dropped. So she says Edward. And something else I noticed was the intonation, that I believe she, like Emma Watson, has sort of a posh accent when she speaks, but it's like received pronunciation. It's what you would hear on the news, and most actors tend to adopt, for example, the most standard British accent. But she does have quite a melody to her way of speaking that is very different from the American melody. So we talked a couple episodes about this, right? About kind of the musicality, how their language really is music and accents are music. And so it's almost like you're tuning to a different radio station when you listen to different accents.
So there's already 2 things there that might throw you off.
What does that mean if something throws you off?
So when something kind of makes you feel out of your comfort zone, makes you feel confused, or, you know, just like not comfortable, it's throwing you off. So that's something that if you're more used to an American accent, to listening to English with the American accent, when you hear something like, Edward, my first cocktail I have to make is an espresso martini, and you're like, what the hell is martini? You know, that's a drink, right? Martini.
That's true. If you're expecting martini and you hear martini, it might not calculate for you that that's what word that is, right?
Is that my teeny? What is a martini?
Yeah. My tiny what?
And then she goes on to say, I feel like of all that human beings in the world.
All of the human beings in the world.
So world, that's already a difficult word in American English for most learners, world. And then world, that intonation, it is just so strange, right? Like you're not used to that kind of sound. If you're not expecting to hear, if you don't know that you're going to be listening to somebody speaking British English. And there's also a third element already there with the vowel sound when she says cocktail. I believe she says that like cocktail.
My first cocktail that I have to make.
Cock, right? With a true O. Is that how you call it? That vowel sound? True O?
I'd have to listen to it again. I didn't hear that. So I would say cocktail. I don't know if she said like cocktail.
My first cocktail that I have to make.
It was more subtle, but it was there because I think Americans, they might tend more to say cocktail.
Cocktail.
And then she said cocktail.
Yeah, this is one that I notice a lot is like how we would say dog. So in American English, we tend to round the sounds more. So it's like dog, right? We don't even have this true O sound. So they would say it like dog. It's much shorter, right? Than that rounded dog.
And this is really interesting because there are some vowel sounds that will get shorter, like dog, but some other sounds may get longer compared to American English, like the A sound. You have more often like a long A. And I have another clip, this one with actor TIMOTHÉE CHALAMET. Let's check it out.
Traditionally served with jam and cream, so...
German cream. This is strawberry.
Jam and cream.
Some what?
Jam and cream.
German cream.
I sincerely don't know what that means.
Jam, sorry. It's like...
Jam and cream.
So this is actually about also about how open the A sound is. You have words like dance. In British English, you'd hear that as dance, bath, lost.
I think too there's a few things happening here. So there's connected speech. So it's jam and cream, but this happens in British and American English that and most of the time will reduce to just an n. So it's jam and cream. Another thing is an American would say German. So he was trying to hear how a British person would say that, right? It would be German and not German. So he heard like German cream. Jam and cream. It's an honest mistake, right? And the other thing that's happening is we don't tend to use the word jam in American English. We tend to use jelly or maybe marmalade. So jam is more of a British way to refer to like a fruit spread that you might put on bread.
Yeah, and connected speech is also something that it's worth talking about in British English because they do more specific linking there with like words like isn't it, in it. Like, yeah, in it.
That's super British.
And there's even also the musicality of it, like in it, the dropped T sound there too. So that's connected speech, but one pattern that you're going to find more in British English.
So she said jam, and he said jam. It's more nasal. The sound I heard was more nasal in TIMOTHÉE's American English. Jam. He even like he enunciates it at the end to be like, oh, you mean jam, not jam. Not
yeah.
Jam.
Which is a good way of practicing making that sound. I think in American English, learners tend to struggle to differentiate man and men, like plural, singular, and plural. So if you really enunciate and exaggerate, that makes it easier. Man or jam.
Nice.
So there's other patterns in British speech that I find is really interesting that are more specific to the Cockney accent, which is quite popular, I would say, especially in media.
What is the Cockney accent? Are you familiar with what that actually refers to?
Not the name, but I know it's like a part of London where I think there's more people speaking that kind of accent there.
Yeah, sort of like a London street accent. Maybe we could look that up real quick. Like what does Cockney refer to? The origin of the word can be traced back to the 14th century, where it initially meant a cock's egg, a metaphor for something defective or non-existent. Over time, it became linked to urban dwellers, particularly those in London, as a term of derision from rural populations. Today, Cockneys are recognized for their wit and charm, and the dialect continues to influence modern English, particularly in multicultural areas of London. So I guess we'll be seeing that in the clip, right, Izzy? Some of that charm that comes along with the accent. But I believe first we have to check out, give some thanks to our Learner of the Week.
All right. So this member of our community of learners is talking about their experience with our app. And what's interesting is that they're actually talking about how it has improved their listening skills. So here's what they said. This app is amazing. I've started to use it 2 months ago and my listening improved a lot. I don't have much free time, so I usually listen to the podcast when I'm traveling to work or when I'm at the gym. And then when I have free time at home, I listen and practice in the app. It's really practical and convenient for me. So this is actually one of the things that I wanted to say also in this podcast, that developing your listening skills is something that takes real practice. And as you also pointed out in the beginning of this episode, Ethan, it takes exposure. So what's really great about this podcast is that we have a special place where you can consume it. where you can listen to it, and now you can watch it as well. And that's really going to help you start to understand natives more and more, from 50, 60, 70%, 80%, until we finally reach practically 100% without subtitles. And we do that with flashcards. We give you vocabulary flashcards so you can learn all the advanced expressions that we are using here. And also we offer a full interactive transcript for all of our episodes. It's really amazing. You got to check it out. It's free to download. So you should just look for Real Life English on Google Play or the App Store, or click the link in the description of this video or wherever you are on any streaming platform, and I'll see you there. All right, now back to the lesson. This clip is with the singer DUA LIPA, and I believe Brits pronounce her name differently. We're going to talk about that in a little bit, but let's check out a clip where she's singing Happy Birthday with a Cockney accent.
Yeah. Sing Happy Birthday in your best Cockney accent.
Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, dear Seth Myers. Happy birthday to you.
I love her.
I love
So
the
funny.
sound of Seth Myers.
For me, it almost sounded like she was saying the THs in like Seth and birthday, like an F, like Seth and birthday. Birthday. Happy birthday. Yeah, so
Happy birthday to you.
I believe that is a quality of the Cockney accent, is they don't say a full th sound when they have the TH.
Say it with an F sound also.
And some accents, British accents, they also will say it at the beginning of words, but they drop the H. So it'd be like, instead of saying three, they'd say tree. It's hard for me even to say it like that, tree. Like like a tree that you have outside, right?
They might even say just like free, right?
Free.
Like,
Yeah, some
sounds
people
like
might say free.
Free, free.
So that, again, it's like really complicated because you can have one sound in British English that, depending where the person's from or depending on their upbringing, it could be pronounced a variety of different ways.
So something that's important, I think, to say is that we are listing all these sounds here, and for all of our viewers and listeners, if you start to pay attention now to all of these sounds when you listen to a podcast or watch anything where there's British people talking, just remember all these patterns. There's not that many that you're going to need to actually start to understand more clearly what they're saying. So this is one of them too, like with the Cockney accent, where you may hear like free, but they're talking about the number 3. So in that case, if you're already expecting that, you're not going to be like, wait, free? That maybe that's the number 3. You're already aware of that. Another pattern that I think it's interesting here is that she just dropped the H sound in the word happy. So it's happy.
Happy. Yeah, that's true.
Happy birthday to you.
Happy birthday.
Something to note here too is Dua Lipa doesn't speak with a Cockney accent. That's not her accent. So she's exaggerating it here for humor. So that might not be fully accurate of how the person speaks, but it's an exaggeration of that accent.
Harry Potter. Harry. And again, the music.
I think you'd usually hear it because that's like a Cockney, and they wouldn't say Potter, they'd say Potter, like a glottal T sound. So I think that's another quality of Cockney English, is often doing this glottal T in the middle of words. Harry Potter, cat and dog.
Cat and dog. And that you start to see that in connected speech and longer phrases, right? In word chunks. Cat and dog, and salt and pepper. Saltin, right? Salt and pepper.
Salt and pepper. You did mention about also her name. So as an American, I would say Dua Lipa, but many British people would actually change both parts. They say Dua Lipa. So that you have like the D turning into like a J sound, Dua. And then what's it called? Like the R sound at the end of Lipa.
It's an intrusive R. That's another pattern.
So there's no R there, but they add an R sound. It's the opposite of what they do in most words that have an R. On some words, they'll actually add in an R. So Dua Lipa.
And I think you can hear that in other words too, like Jew date, or even with a T sound, it becomes like a ch. So you have a Tuesday.
Take a ride on the tube, meaning the tube, which is the underground, is what they would call it there. or the subway is what we'd call it in the United States.
Okay, so let's go to the next clip. This is with actor Cillian Murphy. He's actually playing Tommy Shelby in the series Peaky Blinders. I already talked about it today. And let's pay attention to the vowel sounds that he's making here.
One time, me and my comrades waited 3 days.
Did you notice how he said the word days there?
Days. How is it?
Dice. It's like
Dice.
Dice.
3 days.
One thing I noticed there is what we would typically say is a grammar mistake, but it is a feature of some British accents, that he said me and me comrades. So in American English, or really in any grammatically correct English, standard English, it would be my comrades, me and my comrades. So that's pretty interesting. Me and me comrades.
Me and me comrades. What's a comrade?
Comrade is like your mates, or I imagine he might be talking about in the war, so like his fellow soldiers.
And also mate is an interesting word here, because that's pretty much like bro. You hear a lot of bro these days, right? On the internet, but that's just another person. I don't know if would you use that with women or just normally with guys?
I believe Brits do. They'll use mate with men or women, but another slang term they use a lot is the lads, which is referring to the boys. So you wouldn't use that typically with women. And
it was interesting, something that we didn't talk about today, but I think most people know that, is that you can hear a lot of true T's in the British English. So he said weighted, So, but that's more obvious. Like it's one of the clearest things, and most learners actually appreciate how clear and enunciated that may sound.
I can empathize.
But anyway, the next clip I have here, and the final one, is with singer Adele. And she does have a Cockney accent, a real one. So it's going to be interesting. This is a longer clip, so it'll almost work like a challenge. Now they've gone through all these different sounds, because she's going to apply all of them and introduce a new sound, which you've already hinted at.
Try to challenge yourself and understand, and maybe even let us know in the comments how you did.
If everyone's making music for the TikTok, who's making the music for my generation? Who's making the music for my peers? I will do that job gladly. I'd rather cater to people that have are on my level in terms of the amount of time we've spent on Earth and all the things we've been through. Then I don't want 12-year-olds listening to this record. It's a bit too deep. But the 30 and 40-year-olds that are all committing to themselves and doing therapy, that's my vibe. Yeah. Because that's what I was doing.
It's so musical, that accent. It has a very peculiar, very particular music to it.
And before we just go into the sounds there that she was making, it's just really interesting. It's just really interesting what she was saying. That she is not too concerned with how younger audiences will perceive her music, because it's not meant for them. And I think here she's talking about her producers trying to get her to just do more work on Instagram or
to sell
TikTok,
out, right?
To sell out. What is that?
If someone sells out, it's like they go away from the original purpose or the original message that they were trying to give. And sometimes this happens, that people, they believe in something very strongly and they become famous for that, but then maybe later, because they can make more money or because they believe that it'll make them more famous, they turn their back or they depart away from that original message or purpose. So she's saying that she doesn't want to do that. She wants to stay true to her fans and not just do pop music because it would appeal to a wider audience.
And that's why I think she's so successful, because she's so authentic.
Right.
And
the authenticity.
Producers don't understand that. Like investors, a lot of time they don't understand that it's about authenticity when it comes to art. People are more interested in you just having that audience, and then you're creating stuff for them. You're not trying to reach all the masses, all audiences with your music.
So I actually watched this earlier, and there was one part of that I had to listen to 3 times because I wasn't sure what she was saying. She's saying, that she's not trying, she doesn't want to make music for, no, because, and then she gave the reason. And at first I thought she was saying some person like Tom something. And then the third time I actually heard it was 12-year-olds.
I don't want 12-year-olds listening to this record. It's a bit too deep.
Saying
12-year-olds.
12-years. But she's really connecting them all together that it almost sounds like a person's name or something.
Yeah. She says that I don't want 12-year-olds listening to this record. It's a bit too deep. But the main sound here, the main pattern of speech that I just think it's fascinating and that we can explore with this clip is the glottal T sound. Do you hear how she said the word cater?
Cater.
Cater.
I'd rather cater to people that have like...
Do you know what that means?
It's cater to something, right? Or to someone.
Yeah.
If you cater to someone, you're doing what they desire, basically. You're doing something with the objective that it will make them happy.
Nice. So it's kind of almost like figurative because it does have a literal meaning, right?
Yeah, like a catering service, right? That provides food for an event.
So she said cater. So if you don't even know that word, it's just going to be impossible to understand what she's saying there. Cater.
That's true.
I'd rather cater to people that have, or they're on my level in terms of the amount of time I've spent on Earth, her age, basically, to create music for people her age. And then the most difficult thing, and I had to listen not just 3 times, but I think at least 10 times to understand what she was saying there. But she said, but the 30 and 40-year-olds that are all committing to themselves, the way she said the words 30 and 40, it was like 30 and 40.
But the 30 and 40-year-olds that are all committed.
For me, that was just impossible. Until I just, through context, I was like, she must be talking. She's not talking about 13, So
I recommend if this is an accent that people want to be able to better understand, is actually try to repeat that yourself a bit, like Izzy was here, like 30, 40, because it'll help you to become more accustomed to that glottal T sound that doesn't exist in most languages. And that way you'll be able to hear it better yourself. So you don't necessarily need to speak that way, but if you imitate it sometimes and you start to be able to produce that sound, then you'll be able to hear it better as well.
Yeah. In fact, we did another lesson with Adele covering a few of her songs. And there's also another clip from an interview there where you can learn some connected speech and also this glottal T sound with that lesson. So go check it out.
Yeah. Although is the case with her and DUA LIPA is that with both of them, at first I thought that they were American when I first discovered them. Actually with Adele, I believe I knew she was British because a British friend introduced me to her, but I didn't know she was Cockney. And the first time I heard her speak, it was like, it didn't compute the music that she does with like her speaking with that accent. And the first time I heard DUA LIPA speak as well, it's like, oh my God, she's British. So this is something that happens a lot in music, is that you can't really tell what accent they have, a lot of singers.
Yeah, they sing in a more standard way.
Mm-hmm.
To finish, what would be a good trick? How would you teach learners, like your students, to say this, to make this sound?
What I used to do, a lot of people might know this, that when a kid makes a mistake, say they drop something and breaks, they'd be like, uh-oh. And it's this sound between the and o. That's the glottal T. Uh-oh. So you can practice doing that a lot. And then I would practice it a lot with different phrases like cat and dog. Or like Adele was saying, what I was doing. So even just read a phrase and try to say every T that you see as a glottal T. And over time, it will become easier and easier to do this. And then also, when you hear it, you'll be like, oh, that was a glottal T.
And it does exist in American English too, so that could be productive, even if you are not interested in using that in speaking with a British accent. In words like mountain, right? Mountain.
Yeah, and at the end of words, as long as they're not followed by a vowel, like hat, cat, fat.
These were all the sounds that I wanted to share today. And just to recap, do you remember what those were, Ethan?
So what we talked about intonation, we talked about the vowel sounds, we talked about the true T, we talked about the glottal T, which we were just mentioning, and
the dropped R, the non-rhotic
and
R.
the R. We actually kind of talked about 2 R's. In fact, we talked about like the non-rhotic R, so that where it almost disappears, and the intrusive R, where an R appears somewhere where it's not supposed to be.
Yeah, and I think we also covered the dropped H and some other sounds too. So
that's true.
There were those 5 elemental sounds that I wanted to cover that I really think that if you just master those, if you're able to just, as Ethan said, repeat when you're listening, just out of curiosity, it's like, how can I make that sound too, Play with the musicality and pause and try to hum, like Emma Watson there. It's like, Edward, it goes upwards, right?
That sounds so
that's just like
British for us. That would be like
so
Edward,
posh.
And a British person would be like Edward.
So yeah, repeat, explore, play with it, and just remember these patterns, because if you do, you're going to be able to understand as soon as you hear it.
And that's exactly why we have in our real life way methodology, the always learning, because such a big part of it is just curiosity of being curious when you watch something, when you listen to something, if you hear a British accent, being like, oh, where's that person from? And trying to notice different things. Are they using a glottal T? Are they using more of a true T? Is the R disappearing? Is it starting to roll? And things like this. And just having fun with it, making it something that you can play with. It's not something that you need to stress out just because you're not understanding that one accent. No one is a master of all accents.
Totally. I think having that humbleness, that humility is really important too. So Ethan, it was a pleasure to do this podcast today with you.
Getting to play around with our Britishness. I feel like I should have been drinking some tea with today's episode.
So let me just ask you, if learners, viewers, listeners want to support us, how can they do that?
Yeah, so a free way for you to support us if you are learning a lot with this podcast is, first of all, on YouTube, make sure you hit the subscribe button, the bell down below so you don't miss any new lessons, and the like button. All these really do help us get out to more learners like you so we can help more people to speak English confidently and naturally. Also, if you are listening to this on any podcasting platform, on Spotify, on Apple Podcasts, a free way for you to support us there is by leaving us a 5-star review. And finally, of course, download the app. And if you enjoy the experience, leave us a 5-star review in your favorite app store.
And remember, as we like to say, no matter what divides us, our differences in cultures, accents, anything, no matter what divides us, that which unites us is far greater. 1, 2, 3. Yeah.
So have you ever wondered why some English learners are able to speak a beautiful native English? Is it something that just comes naturally to some people while it's impossible for others? I'm sure that at some point you have fantasized about having that perfect American or British accent when you speak English. Now, while so many of us have this goal to have this native accent, it's something that's rarely taught at schools, right? Well, we're going to help you out with that goal today.